Want to make your own podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easy, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. Here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I have an outlet for the creativity and ideas I want to share with the world. I recommend you give it a try. We all have a voice, so share it with the world. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app, or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Being able to discern a false Messiah. Many, even believers, even people who may be faithful church attenders, feel like they understand the Bible, would be deceived by it. It's very important to point out right from the Bible the warning. If you see someone that says the Messiah is here in the desert, here, come over here and see me, don't do it. And it says, as the lightning, you can see it from the east, from the west, that's going to be my coming. If it's a limited location, oh, hey, I heard the Messiah came back and he's over in Israel or he's over in wherever, New York, don't believe it. And I think that's a really important warning, that it's going to be no mistaking the actual Messiah, because there's going to be false messiahs. And they're going to have signs and wonders. That's part of what's going on with this whole program of breeding and blending in and tying into occult powers, is there's going to be things that are going to be incredible. Especially if you have some sort of disclosure event of an alien tech source, and they're saying, we are your creators and we're here to help and we've got amazing technology, and they show things that look like magic to us. I mean, a lot of people are going to be leaving the church in droves. And Revelation talks about that great falling away and a deception. Welcome to the Days of Noah podcast, where we talk all things biblical, supernatural, and strange. This week, we're going to review an old episode from The Bite Show. This was a roundtable discussion that the late Doug Riggs had with L.A. Marzulli and Stan Deyo and a few others. And do they ever cover the gamut of end times situations regarding the Antichrist, alien deception, breeding programs? And what's really interesting is Doug Riggs coming from the position of working with SRA survivors and Nephilim mothers, and that whole counseling that he had been working with many, many women to help set them free through Christ's help. And L.A. Marzulli and Stan Deyo coming from the alien abduction side, and how both of those breeding programs are working together by the enemy in order to bring about the final conflict of the book of Revelation, and how we need to be aware of these events so as not to be deceived, because there is going to be a great falling away and the church needs to wake up. Welcome back to the Days of Noah podcast, everybody. So we're going to talk, this was a roundtable, End Times roundtable, from Doug Riggs' website, right, Luke? DougRiggs.org?
Correct, yeah.
And it's L.A. Marzulli, which I guess his real name is Lynn, because they call him Lynn in the recording, but he goes by L.A., and Stan Deyo, which I think I'd heard that name before, but I was reintroduced to it. And, of course, Doug, who unfortunately passed away, the same year that Rob Skiba did? Was it 2021, Luke, during COVID? I don't know if it was COVID-related, do you?
Yeah, I don't know the cause, but yeah, the timing was similar, along with Russ Dizdar. So some big shoes to be filled there.
For sure.
A lot of experience was moved on to glory. So
right. So as best we can, we want to pass along their work and continue it and spread the word about it. You know, Doug was a SRA survivor counselor for a few decades, right? And did Russ do the same thing?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
So they're in the same vein.
So this was
DougRiggs.org is the website. It's still maintained by one of his church members. Even with him being gone, and so there's an email list, and he'll send different things out to people, and then all the links and stuff are pretty much still available.
Okay.
I think the host of this interview, Leanne Hughes, maybe.
Yeah.
If I'm going based on memory, she's passed on as well.
Really?
So these are, I think this interview was maybe 10 years ago, but it's timely. And as you guys heard, it was a round table that Doug Riggs did put together. And he wanted to look at the common threads between what he was hearing from survivors of SRA, satanic ritual abuse, and them describing hybrids and almost like a breeding program, to what L.A. Marzulli was experiencing with his research, talking at UFO abductees and the same type of accounts of, pregnancies becoming taken out, or, within the first trimester or something, disappearing, and then maybe even reintroduced. So where was the common thread between the two things? And then the other gentleman was, I think his expertise was in technology.
Okay.
So, yeah, it was a pretty interesting interview.
Yeah.
You said you listened to it a couple times.
Yeah, I did, and I took a bunch of notes on it. Man, and there's so many of these topics that we could spend a whole show on. And they said there was going to be a part 2 to it as well, Luke. Do you know if they did a part 2?
I've got to research that. There's a fourth name that was in the conversation. I think the gentleman's name was Dan Webb.
Yeah.
He was listening in. I did listen to him and Doug talk, and it was almost like he just listened in on the conversation. And he's one of people that have gone to Doug's church forever. They've known each other for a long time, and so he's helped counsel them, and he's came out of this mess and has ties to the royal family and stuff.
Okay.
So he kind of gave his own 2 cents on things. I've got to find a part 2 if there was a part 2.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear it. Yeah, so they hit on a lot of things. So I'm going to rattle off a few of them. So they talked about the Solomon Island giants. And there's a book on that Dr. Laura Sanger has mentioned, I believe. Solomon Islands Mysteries, Accounts of Giants and UFOs in the Solomon Islands by Marius Boreon. Excellent book. It's just anecdote after anecdote of the indigenous people of the Solomon Islands experiencing UFO phenomenons, giant encounters, 15-footers, women getting abducted by giants and living with them for years and years and years. Just incredible stories. And they're even recent. This isn't hundreds of years ago. This is still going on. And so LA mentions that he would love to get a team down there and really extensively research it.
Yeah, and he said a big team. He didn't want a little
Yeah,
team. He didn't
yeah,
want anything happening to him.
right. Get 2 or 3 people and they go missing, right? And let's see. So he talks about Hitler's 3,000 Tibetan monks because they were trying to open like portals to dimensional portals, is my understanding, right? They were trying to get in contact with evil powers, other entities, and so he had these 3,000 monks like chanting, doing their meditation or whatever 24/7.
I think I missed that part.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
I've heard this. Well, they didn't go into a lot of detail about it. They just briefly mentioned the 3,000 monks. But I've heard this before about Hitler. So I kind of added a little bit more of a background to that. But and then there was I don't know if Luke was. Do you remember if this was an abductee or a SRA person? I think it was SRA. They said there's like an underground base below Caesar's Palace, and
yeah,
then they were talking
Pastor
about
Doug had talked about that,
and then
it was the SRA.
It was a survivor. Okay, and then they mentioned, yeah, you know about Area 51, but do you know about Area 52? And she's like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that. That's the Nephilim Project.
Which Pastor Doug, if you remember, when he was interviewed by Nate and Luke, about 6 months before his passing on Blurry Creatures, he brings up that story.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So it was, so this individual had multiple personalities and tied to the royal families and stuff, and he was working with her. And one of the things that was really interesting is she had a husband. So this individual had a husband that was in the military. And because she said to Doug that I got clearance. He's like, you got clearance? What do you mean you got clearance? And then he rattled off some numbers. He's like, yeah, that's my access to get down there. So apparently at some point, Doug talked to the husband. It's like, your wife claims that she's got like above top secret clearance or something. And he's like, well, I know how to access the database. And it basically, when he typed in the number, is like he could see that that number existed in the sense that it would actually work, but it didn't give any details for him to see. It's like, whoa.
Oh, that's crazy.
But yeah, she got into a childlike state, a part of her, and even though she was a grown woman and was testifying to, a replica of Satan's throne in like the basement area, and then there was an access way to almost kind of like what you hear with the Hyperloops stuff that Elon has put out there. Basically a tunnel system that's almost like a subway, but almost levitates, or it's done in a vacuum where it's high speed.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, you could zip from Vegas to, other parts in Nevada and stuff,
Yeah, seconds.
Super fast.
Yeah, I've heard of those too. At one point, I think, talking about that same lady, that because of her programming, that she could manifest, like through her, Lucifer would appear in these deep underground bases.
Yeah, I don't know how that all works.
Right.
But, Pastor Doug did say that was something that the enemy was doing with the SRA survivors and the trauma and the programming, was to basically create a portal through these individuals. So it was almost like a legal right that the enemy had, that the occupied space was in the individual. But because of that, because we know Satan is a created being, not like God. He can't be everywhere at once. So he's got to be able to move,
Yeah.
which the other gentleman in the conversation was talking about physical pieces of equipment, not just spiritual things, but literal nuts and bolts type technology that he knows of or encountered. But it's very interesting in how the enemy would use an individual like that as a portal,
Right.
and then could manifest himself in a given situation, a given room with that individual present.
I wonder if he's even able
I don't know how that works.
Right. I wonder if he's even able to travel almost instantaneously across the earth through different individuals that have...
I mean, he is a spirit, so we do know that.
Yeah.
But as the Bible describes, like the chariots and the angels that picked up Elijah and stuff, so there was like technology, and why do they need like some type of vehicle to move? But unless I don't know, just want to have it,
right? I know Tim.
Maybe it's not a need, but
I know Tim Alberino's talked about that.
But you think about hybrids. If they're hybrids and they're a mixture between angelic and human, they got limitations.
Sure.
So if you're looking at the UFO phenomenon, they're not in the spirit realm. They're in the natural realm. So they might need a nuts and bolts type craft or something to move around.
Right. Yeah.
Anyways.
Don, anything that's stood out to you that you thought was interesting?
The thing that really stood out to me during this, and it sparked my interest more so than most of it, was the observation that the end times are starting to unfold and starting to happen. Like I think the quote was a runaway train, and I know that I believe it was Mr. Riggs who was talking about the earthquake situation, and this was a long time ago for this interview, but there is a website that tracks earthquakes, and it gives you live updates. And if you take a look at that, it's literally all over the world, and it's every minute.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's really cool to take a look at. But I think that the talk of end times and the talk of Christ's return, I think, is probably the coolest part about the roundtable that I was interested in.
And one of the things that they talked about is being able to discern a false messiah, and how many, even believers, even people who, maybe faithful church attenders, feel like they understand the Bible, would be deceived by. And I thought it was very important to point out right from the Bible the warning. If you see someone that says the Messiah is here in the desert, here, come over here and see me, don't do it. And it says, as the lightning, you can see it from the east, from the west, that's going to be my coming. So if it's a limited location, oh, hey, I heard the Messiah came back and he's over in Israel, or he's over in wherever, New York,
right.
Don't believe it. And I think that's a really important warning, that it's going to be no mistaking the actual Messiah, because there's going to be false messiahs, and they're going to have signs and wonders. There's, that's part of what's going on with this whole program of breeding and blending in and tying into occult powers, is there's going to be things that are going to be incredible, especially if you have some sort of disclosure event of an alien tech source, and they're saying, we are your creators, and we're here to help, and we've got amazing technology, and they show things that look like magic to us. I mean, a lot of people, that's what I think LA was talking about. People are going to be leaving the church in droves. And Revelation talks about that great falling away and a deception.
Yeah, that was something he that in the opening question he asked the panel, and LA started off like, "What is your concern? What's pressing on your mind?" And both the individuals answered Doug and said, "The church is asleep. They're not aware." LA was talking about a prophecy conference that him and Russ Dizdar and the others were at. There's a church of 2,500 people. They had 45 people in attendance. And then he said it other times. The interview that I've mentioned to you guys, where him and Tim Amberino are talking about the Pentagon release. And when that took place, he said he talked to his wife beforehand. He's like, "I'm ready. I'm ready for my phone to go off the hook and, to go here and there and to fill up my schedule and all this type of stuff."
Remember that.
He's been researching this on the fringe for for decades. But here it is on Fox News, a Pentagon's releasing something. He's expecting pastors are going to call him and want his expertise. He's like, crickets.
They don't even care. Pastors don't even care. And I don't know if it's like we're so trained to be about the individual in the West, and everything's about the individual, and how do I make my life better, and how do I deal with my own sin issues, and and those are important things, but
or like self-improvement type stuff.
Self-improvement, yeah. Keys to a better life.
Well, I almost wonder if it's in part it's the subject matter, because for the last few episodes I've been bringing up Sound of Freedom's coming July 4th, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I'm hoping for a big turnout, but I really feel like it's going to pale in comparison to Chosen, which is the traditional gospel story of the life of Jesus, seeing him do the miracles. It's all the wonderful things that he did. But when you're talking about exposing the darkness, as it says in Ephesians, or even the end time prophecy type stuff, which can go down some dark paths, it's almost like the church doesn't want to touch it. I don't know if they're afraid. Are they afraid to offend people, or they just want to keep it very cookie cutter, very easy
to swallow? I wonder, wouldn't it be interesting if they made a film or a show like The Chosen that was Jesus' spiritual warfare? I
mean, part of his ministry was casting out demons.
Yeah.
So what if there was a version of The Chosen with his life and ministry of 3.5 years?
You're right.
3 years, whatever it was, where you're seeing you're seeing the demons coming out like an exorcist type of thing. And you know what? They might have, I know Hollywood glamorized that. It probably was very simple. They just simply came out, and it wasn't like a big ordeal. But I'm thankful that when Mel Gibson and Jim, I always mess up his name, so I'm not going to
Caviezel.
With Caviezel, the Passion of the Christ. I'm thankful that the church showed up for that.
Right.
Because it broke box office records for rated R film.
Yeah.
And it showed the blood. It showed how it really was.
Yep, and all those Hollywood studios that didn't want anything to do with it because it was Christian, it was religious, they could have made a killing.
Yeah,
they would have profited off of it.
Yeah, so that definitely was a common thread in the beginning, was the church is asleep, and how...
That's all right.
AirMed. You know what? That AirMed is, because I know you guys are in Wisconsin, it's red and white. It's actually from Madison.
Oh, neat.
By the way.
Wow.
Yeah. Why it's on loan down here, I don't know.
Okay.
But, lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
But,
the church being asleep, I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to take for us to wake up. I mean, I know they are going to keep banging the drum. But you had some PowerPoints that you might want to go through in particular. But
sure. Yeah, yeah, in no particular order. I think the technology, the implants, those were really fascinating, and I know LA's got some documentaries on that stuff. I remember watching one of them a few years ago where a person had a little grain of rice thing implant. He was an abductee, and he had this little implant in his leg or something, and got it checked out at the doctor. You know, yep, we see this thing, and we scanned it. Okay, all right, we're scheduling your surgery, and then they show up to the surgery a few weeks later or whatever, and it's nowhere to be found. Like, none of the instruments are picking it up, and LA prays, and a few minutes after he finished praying, it pops up. And that story isn't in this particular roundtable discussion, but there was another one that they said that they actually saw it move underneath the skin away from the person trying to deal with it. And so the person that LA referenced was Dr. Roger Leir. It's Leir, and he has some documentaries on that. I think it was like interview with alien interviews or something like that. But he has 17 surgeries that he's done, taking these implants out.
Wow.
And I
makes you wonder,
yeah.
like, what is the enemies? We were talking about how they might create legal right with these programming and split personality. What would the technology be used for? Like the physical, like grain of rice, almost like an RFID chip like thing.
Well,
I don't know what it'd be used for.
I think it was, again, referencing a different documentary from LA that I saw a while back that you probably got me into, Luke, a few years ago. You know, they checked it, like, I don't know how you would check this, but it had a microprocessor clock speed of a supercomputer. Like, it was super fast. But in this roundtable discussion, they did mention one of the uses, and that they said that say you were, someone like Doug, and you're trying to counsel and heal a person who has gone through this dissociation from all of the trauma they've been through, that as you're peeling back the layers and trying to get them set free layer by layer, the implant can actually stop the survivor from being able to function. It'll shut them down, so to speak, if they're about to tell.
Almost like a trigger that would,
yes.
It would trigger them to cause them to hinder the healing process.
Yep. So I wonder, I don't know if that has anything to do with maybe creating amnesia as well, like in the abductees, because they don't remember things. Maybe the implant has something to do with that.
And I also wonder, because a lot of the occult will take different artifacts and pray over them and curse them and maybe leave them on people's property, or in my neck of the woods, someone might take a clip of hair, and you might tie it to a voodoo doll or something like that. So it's an article that's associated, and
Dr. Laura calls that fetishes, that they were finding these things left
right
on properties,
right. Mm-hmm. which are biblical. The children of Israel were encountering that in Jericho and a lot of different nations that they were defeating, that the Lord was telling them, to wipe out. But the spoils of those nations had demon gods on them. So the way I always understood it, if it actually had an image of a demon god, there's a legal right. And even though you might pray or whatever, you're not going to remove that legal right, because the demon's image is still there. You have to physically destroy that thing, melt it, destroy it. But if it's something that doesn't have an image, I think it can be cleansed. But it might be used as a point of contact, or a legal right where
it has access.
Hey, that thing's in me, so I can I can go attack this person.
Yeah, and God was very specific when he allowed Israel to be able to take the spoils of war, and other times where it was, nope, you're not taking anything, destroy everything. And of course, there are times where they disobeyed. Where I think even Saul, right, he took back some stuff, and others, yeah, in the Old Testament. So God's very he's very clear on when he says it's okay, because he knows what's going on there. So I'd love to dig into some of those alien interview documentaries with Dr. Roger Leir. All right. Another point. Doug said, I think this was Doug, since 2002, so prior to 2002, he said the women that were like Nephilim mothers, I believe, had to be part of the royal bloodline. And he said after 2002, I don't know what changed, but it said that they could, just like Genesis 6, they could choose whoever they wanted to mate with. It didn't have to be royal bloodline. And I know, Luke, you've talked about this too, and they mention it in this interview, that Satan, kind of sensing the time growing short, he's getting directly involved. It's not just other fallen angels that are mating with women. It's him directly.
That is what has been reported.
Yeah,
which we were speculating from the Book of Revelation, where it talks about Satan himself being tossed or bound in the pit for 1,000 years,
just like the other ones.
Just like the original 200 Watchers that Enoch talks about, and also the Bible. We wonder if that is his future punishment for these current acts.
Right, because then it would all line up, because he would get the same punishment that they had in the abyss. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. There was a story of a golden skin, black-eyed man that showed up in, like, what was it, like a shopping mall or something, in some cold part of you remember that, Don? It was like a cold part of the country, like 20 degrees outside, and this guy shows up in like a t-shirt and shorts, and he's got like golden spray-on tan-looking skin and black eyes, and like the first thing he says is, "Due to recent events, I've decided to become mortal." And they like turn their head for a split second, and he's gone. Crazy.
And the woman that was a Christian sharing that testimony said it was almost like the air got sucked out of the room. It was just this coldness, this evil she could sense in that room, and she felt the prompting of the Lord. It's like, don't talk to him.
Wow.
Just leave him alone. She kind of acknowledged him with a grin or a nod or something. But when she turned to a colleague, and it was like split second, turned to him and turned back, he was gone, and there was nowhere he could have gone.
Right. She would have seen him even if he ran.
She should have been able to see him.
That coldness that you mentioned, that's been talked of too. Like, I think it was Fritz, was it Zimmerman that did the book on the burial mounds? He spent like 10 plus years researching all these burial mounds. You can't just go Google most of these around the country. And he found these areas, but they've done with testing equipment, like ghost hunter people have come there to some of these places. But they've, had gauges and temp probes and things like that. They've seen the temperature drop, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly, say, 75 degrees to, 10 degrees in like the space of a minute. So they've seen these things happen, and they've caught it, with their instruments as well. Another interesting thing was they're talking about the Nephilim mothers being taken to the peak of Mount Hermon for a conception ritual. And if you recall, it was a Blurry Creature episode. Maybe you know this already, Luke or Don, but the UN has a base, right? Apparently on Mount Hermon.
Right.
So that's some connection right there.
So obviously, a little more backstory on Pastor Doug Riggs, I think, is worth talking about, because he brought it up to Nate and Luke on Blurry Creatures. He's like, I know these stories and stuff, as fantastic as they are, that's not my purpose. My purpose isn't to seek out and get the greatest story just to, make a name for myself or something. He didn't ask for this assignment. The Lord directed him to that part of the country to be a pastor in that area. And in the process of counseling and discipleship and, just going through the scriptures, he realized he had quite a few members of his congregation that was not getting free. That was really struggling with the scriptures and absorbing it. It was like mental blocks and stuff like that. So that's when there was more one-on-one counseling to see what's going on, and you'd start digging into the generational side of things so that, a person can be totally clean, because we got all this baggage. Some of the baggage that we carry is generational, that we didn't choose. It's what the Bible describes as the sins of the forefathers being passed on.
Right.
Which the enemy and the elites use that to their advantage, right?
Yep.
We've discussed that before, where there won't be, you take a particular bloodline, maybe even going back to Nimrod, and if there's not one Christian and there's not an individual, imagine a generational family tree where nobody came to Christ. So the blood of Jesus has not been applied. It's just the sin force has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. So now, just like blessings can be passed on, curses are being passed on.
Right.
And it's almost like a demonic energy or power that's being passed on through this family tree. So Pastor Doug was just trying to help these individuals. And then he's experiencing, he actually talked about reading a book on split personalities. Didn't know if it was relevant or not to what he was dealing with his parishioners, but he happened to read a little insert from this particular book. And the individual in front of him, she split. A part came out and identified herself as a different name. I actually have in the fire station here, I got it from the library, Sybil. Remember that? They even made a movie of it.
Yeah, I remember that. I watched that in school.
And in that case, they were reported like 17. So this individual comes out, I'll just call her Mary, starts talking to Doug, and Doug's like, I haven't met you yet. Why haven't you been present? Well, I've been listening in the background, but why haven't you came forth? Oh, because we didn't think you would believe us. But because you read this part in this passage of that book dealing with the psychology of individuals that are split, it's like, okay, we can trust you.
Huh.
That's kind of wild.
That is wild.
So yeah, he's came across these stories, and as amazing as it is, he's just trying to get people free, which he's done a marvelous job doing, along with Russ Dizdar. It's taking what the enemy meant for evil and ripping it out of his hands, and through the power of God's blood and his grace and his wisdom, these individuals are being healed. And in the process, it's kind of like a special forces individual turning a terrorist, and now they're an ally. Now we get some inside information on what the enemy is overtly trying to do.
Right. And and that's valuable intel. And I think what's great to me is, as we talk about some of these topics, they're fascinating, they're interesting, they stretch our paradigm. To me, at least, that's like a gateway to get us thinking and talking about this stuff, because, our flesh is peaked at some of these things. We go, oh, really? And But like you said, Luke, there's much more important spiritual truths and getting people set free and making sure the church is not asleep and things like that. But it's great, to be able to say, hey, check out this show, check out this podcast. They talk about giants. They talk about, aliens. It's really interesting. And someone who maybe has just no interest in anything Christian or church related might go, oh, that sounds interesting. So I think it's just a great way to bridge the gap that way. Another thing they mentioned was possibly, because they talked about not just human angel hybrids, but also insects and animals. And so there was speculation, maybe this is some of the plagues of Revelation, right? Some of these creatures that are being bred. And so there was a comparison to like Sauron in Lord of the Rings building his army of orcs, and then he had the hybrid Uruk-hai, right? That were bred with elves or something. So
yeah, I think they named that was the reason. Like, I think someone asked the question, why is the enemy? If we're hearing this from the UFO side of things, we're hearing this from the ritually abused side of things. What is the enemy's purpose? What is he trying to do? What is his goal? And I think you hit it on the head. I think it was LA that gave the analogy to Lord of the Rings. He's building an army, which Russ Dizdar talks about, looking at maybe 5th generation, I think we might be at, potentially 150 million individuals worldwide that have been programmed. So, and the Black Awakening, his book that he wrote, where he encountered somebody that was a split, and they're like, yeah, you have an army, but we're building an army and we're going to take over type of thing. So the enemy is definitely building an army to cause chaos, to fight the Lord's return. But it's also even more sinister with I think the family trees of the royals with that type of breeding, because it's literally birthing the Antichrist.
Right.
Which, from what the reports are, from what Pastor Doug has experienced and learned, he feels like they're living among us, as Dr. Jacobs has researched dealing with the UFO phenomenon, but they're even can pass as humans now. They're in a position of authorities now where the elites are taking orders from them, and the coming dictator, the Antichrist, will be a hybrid that is going to probably look extremely handsome, be very charismatic, and
it's probably going to have some tie-in, because Revelation tells us it comes from the abyss, and then it gives us the name Apollyon, which is also Nimrod. So it seems like, and even if you look into like the Iraq War and some of the artifacts that we took back, that were like high priority, as soon as we got to that palace, we got all these artifacts. We knew what we were looking for. I think they even had like a deck of cards given to the soldiers. You see these, 52
I think that
items.
I think that kind of ties into the fictional Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is based on the Nazis' desire to find occultic power, which it wasn't occultic, it was the biblical Ark. But in their mind, they remembered, that wherever that thing went, they defeated armies.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
That type of thing. So I think the kings of the earth are looking for ancient technology, ancient Genesis 6, Nimrod age, that type of any artifacts they can find from that period. And
yep, it makes you wonder too about makes you wonder about the preservation of bodies too, like the mummies, that they weren't just like having some fantasy of being in the afterlife, but they actually believed that there was a way they could come back or something. So I don't know. It gets a little crazy when you think about like if they've actually found Nimrod's body or some sort of sarcophagus or something like that. I don't know. But you mentioned
Well,
go ahead.
Well, you brought up Apollyon. What was the other name you said from Revelation?
Apollyon or Nimrod. It's all the same name.
Nimrod.
Or Orion.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
But I remember Pastor Doug talk about an individual. They actually had a name for one of the hybrids, and it was like Apollyon Alexander. I forget. There was another one, but
Okay.
it was kind of along what's in the scripture, but also tied to these dictators of old.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So I know one thing I watched from Rob Skiba years ago was he's like, look, if you look at the way it's said in Revelation, it's telling you who the Antichrist is. And it says there was one that was or was not, but will be. And it was basically saying, look, this guy, Apollyon, which is Nimrod, died, but he's going to come back. So his contention that it was literally Nimrod, but I also think it's possible that it could be some sort of connection to Nimrod being revived in maybe the Antichrist being bred. I don't know. So it's like maybe a combination of the two.
You know the story or the thought behind the origin of demons, right?
Yep.
So the demons are the disembodied spirit of the Nephilim.
Right.
So the original half human, half angelic, they're wiped out during the flood and at different times after the flood. So their flesh have died, but their spirit is still alive. And it is understood that Nimrod began to be something different. Like he did something to change himself into almost like a hybrid. So if with him being killed or dying, his spirit is still somewhere, right? So could that spirit maybe go into a future hybrid?
That's interesting. Yeah,
I don't know.
Or maybe
so
it's
almost like
from the
it's
abyss.
Almost like Nimrod's. It's almost like Nimrod just came back because the spirit of him has came back in this new form.
Yeah,
I
don't know. I don't know how that works, but and in Revelation says it comes from the abyss, so maybe there's something that's released. Maybe his spirit or his hybrid spirit is there. I know we're just kind of spitballing here, speculating, but it's interesting. Interesting to think about. But just going back real quick, you're talking about some of the hybrids and things like that, and the being fifth generation in. I think it was L.A. talking about the early ones had black eyes. They were very sickly looking, stringy hair. But as we've talked about the last few shows, they've basically perfected it, and they can blend in, look like us,
right,
and are in seats of power.
Right.
What do you think,
so
Don?
I'll reference
Is this
again?
Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
No, I was just going to plug Dr. Jacobs. So he had the book They Walk Among Us.
Okay.
And then he's got a more recent book called The Threat. And but he's a secular, non-Christian individual that has researched the UFO phenomenon.
Oh, that was the Jacobs they were talking about on this show.
I believe so.
Yes. Okay.
And so it's his research and reporting, plus LA's encountered testimony that has paralleled that, that these individuals are passing for human, Don,
I wanted to get kind of your thoughts as someone that maybe has, because you've been with us, co-hosting with us for a while now, and you're hearing about these things more in this last year. But as someone that maybe this is more newer to you than, say, Luke and I from a few years ago, we got into some more of these fringe topics. What is your perspective? Is it just off the rails? And then another way to ask it is, okay, you've kind of been introduced to some of these strange ideas, supernatural ideas. if you were to describe what we just talked about in the last 45 minutes to, your buddy that goes to church with you or whatever, what would he say? So kind of like, where are you at with it? How does it fit? And then what would the average Christian think?
I think the average Christian would probably think a bit off the rails. My personal viewpoint is when we talk about these subjects, I end up being refocused on what Christ told us to do specifically. And I think that the topics are very interesting, and they just happen to be very interesting to me. And in fact, I do a lot of listening while I'm, quote unquote, co-hosting.
Yep.
But I do a lot of learning during the show itself, and so I find it all fascinating. However, at the same time, it brings me back to Matthew 28, where Christ tells us to go into the world and make disciples. And there's obviously God can use anything. He can use a show. He can use a simple discussion about something. Yeah. And I think that the discussion, as long as it goes back to Christ and salvation, I think that it's in the Bible. So I think that God wants us to look at things and think about things.
Yeah, I think, you and I talked last week when you came over about that too. It is helpful to remind ourselves to stay grounded in that, because we can let this train go off the rails and kind of run its own course. But like Luke said, Pastor Doug was trying to set people free. And so hopefully these topics, as people listen to them, wherever their, religious paradigm, biblical paradigm, secular, atheist, whatever, they understand that what we're just trying to do is piece together, sometimes anecdotally, little stories here and there, a worldview that says, look, history is wild, history is supernatural, and the future is going to get even wilder. And you got to be on the right side of things. Like, you're going to have to pick a team. There's going to be a dividing line, and you don't want to, there is no being on the fence. Just like the old saying, there's no atheists in foxholes, right? When things hit the fan, we have to know which team we're playing for, because God is sovereign over it all, and he's not going to be mocked. These things are only going to go on for so long before he rights every wrong. And so, hopefully people understand that in the midst of all this kind of fantastical stuff, while we believe it's true, the most important thing is, like you said, Don, that if we're right with our Creator, if we're forgiven by our Creator, then no matter what happens in this life, the next life is set. We are with God forever to live. But hopefully we're just generating interest and awareness in some of these things to get people thinking about the Bible and supernatural topics, to explore it, because, most people have no interest in setting foot in a church, but maybe they'll listen to a podcast like this and go, that's really fascinating. I heard a story about that, or my friend was telling me about a book. And if we can plant those seeds to get people to understand that, it's not just some dry, dusty old book, as like The Simpsons would mock it. I remember an episode of The Simpsons where you guys remember they had a few episodes where they had like a pastor at a church, right? And the pastor was like, I forget what he was talking about, but he goes, well, it's better than trying to get people to pay attention to this 2,000-year-old sleeping pill. And he's mocking the Bible. But man, these crazy stories are in the Bible. The things that we're talking about, these supernatural things, are there. And hopefully it just gives more credence to the reality that's all around us, and we need to be on God's side, because annihilation is coming to those who are not.
Real quick, just to add in there, is that the book of Revelation is what I would say what brought me to Christ, and that book is just full of things that you can talk about inside and out for the rest of your life. And I have run into Christians that don't really talk about that book, because they'll say, well, we can't understand it, or we won't, we just don't know. And part of that's true, but I think that unless we explore those things, nothing is going to get, opened up to us.
Right. Yeah, it's better to do that and maybe make a few mistakes along the way than to just dismiss it out of hand, right?
Makes me think of the scripture, I don't remember where it is, in the New Testament, where it talks about, you need not any man teach you, but the Spirit will lead you in all truth. And in the beginning of the book of Revelation, it says, to all those who read this, there's a blessing. So you let the Spirit of God lead you in reading the books of the prophecy that came to John, and it ties to, it's the other side of the revelation, or the testament. It's a new covenant, whereas Daniel was in the old covenant, but there's parallel between what he experienced in the book of Revelation. And the Spirit of the Lord can open your eyes to things. And as Pastor Doug has said, when he was going through all these counseling, his experience and all this darkness, it caused him to get on his knees and to humbly ask for help. And his paradigm and his God box had to get bigger. And he had to realize that even all this stuff that is being allowed, part of it is because man is just evil, and he's allowing it through their willful disobedience. And part of it makes me think, is just God's lifting his hand of covering off and be like the fullness of sin. He's allowing it to just run its course before the judgment comes. But we need to remember that he's bigger than all of this stuff. He's merciful, he's gracious, he's forgiving. And it doesn't matter how, and there's a lot of hope when you look at somebody that Pastor Doug has counseled, and they've got 1,000 split personalities that have been programmed by a hybrid. It's just like, what? That just, I don't even know how to wrap my head around that. But then he said, through God's wisdom, his experience at counseling for decades, this person is getting free in under a year and becoming whole. Is just a testimony to God and how he can just right the ship. No matter how the enemy tries to destroy things, God can turn things around for good.
Yep, and set people free. And so, yeah,
exactly. Hopefully
we insert that hope as we talk about some of these dark things. That there is always hope, and sometimes it's a long road, because like Doug had to learn. He didn't know how to counsel these people at first. Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. This was great. We'll wrap up there for now, and talk to you next week.
Sounds good, guys. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Days of Noah podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. If we can ask for your help to help spread the show to more and more people, go and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and tell your family and friends about it. That really does a lot to get the word out about our show and bring more people into an awareness of these important topics. If you want to reach out to us with any questions or comments for the show, feel free to do so. Give us an email at thedaysofnoahpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, see you next week, and God bless.